Hi, this is Lauren Rose from the It Hurts to Mom podcast. Did you know that up to 80% of our physical pain is actually from emotional pain? Don't miss your opportunity to get my new workbook called Exploring How Your Emotions Relate to Your Physical Pain. In it, you'll consider how trauma, trapped emotions, grief, and lack of forgiveness might be contributing to your chronic pain. This is not to say your pain isn't real. Actually, it's the opposite. Your pain, emotional and physical, is very real. It's only to say that there's a significant mind-body connection that most of us don't realize. Get your workbook today for only $7 at ithurtstomom.com under the shop category, because once you determine the connection, you might be surprised at the extent that emotions are contributing to your pain. And then you can start to heal what's trapped inside. And while you're there, don't forget my freebie, 30 Ways to Relieve Pain Without Taking a Pill at ithurtstomom.com. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the It Hurts to Mom podcast. I'm Lauren Rose, and today we're talking about two healing habits, gratitude and simplifying. Our guest is Lisa Zawrotny. Lisa is the founder of Positively Productive Systems and the host of the Positively Living podcast. She's also a caregiver, wife, mother, business owner, as well as a productivity and accountability coach certified in time and stress management, helping other multi-passionate entrepreneurs who struggle to balance business and family. So you sound like you do a lot. Thanks for coming on.
Hi, thank you, Lauren. It's really an honor to be here. It sounds like a lot. Yeah, and I suppose we all feel that way if we stop to take note, right?
Yeah, if we list all our roles in life. Yeah.
hmm
So first, let's talk about gratitude. I think it's such an important subject. So let's chat about what it means and why it's so important.
Yeah, I'd love to do that, especially because I think sometimes we hear it like a buzzword and we don't
Hmm.
think about what it really means and or how simple it is to practice it and to get so much from it. Okay, so let's start with like the Harvard medical research because there's so much research behind gratitude now. So this is not just anecdotal anymore. Harvard describes it as like a thankful appreciation, right? So we're acknowledging the goodness in life. But an even better part of that is that by acknowledging the goodness in our life, tangible, intangible, or otherwise, we're connecting to something greater than ourselves as individuals. That could be other people, it could be nature, it could be a higher power, or all of the above. And that appreciation, when expressed, can offer us a number of gifts and opportunities. I sum it up in three categories of healing, connection, and transformation. And when you practice gratitude, I mean, studies are showing that it can boost productivity. It can reduce pain, which I think is a huge one.
Mm,
You don't think about that connection, and it can improve relationships, including the one with yourself.
mm, absolutely. And I know there's research too that when we express gratitude, our brain releases dopamine and serotonin, which are the happy chemicals, right? So we
That's right.
immediately get a mood boost. And so, over time, expressing gratitude can actually change, the neurotransmitters in our brain because our brain is very neuroplastic. It can change with what we're thinking. So if we've got automatic negative thoughts, those pathways are going to be, formed. But if we start changing that and saying, no, I'm not going to focus on this negative, I'm going to focus on the positive, those pathways will change and we'll be better at focusing on the positive, and we'll be happier.
Right. These are wonderful positive psychology principles of where we're looking toward the good. And it doesn't mean that we're negating the bad or ignoring it or trying to pretend that it doesn't exist. And I think that's so important. It's one of the first, like, sort of a misunderstanding that I had in the beginning.
Mm,
And I share my story about this is that, I was going through such a tough time that I felt like, oh, well, be grateful. It's passed off as like this thing that it's like, wait, but what about my lived experience? What about what I'm going through? And so, to your point, though, we do have a negativity bias. It takes more opportunities to see the good, more of a practice to see the good to outweigh what we just naturally by default can see as the negative. So you're right. The neuroplasticity in our brains is a wonderful opportunity. Same thing with meditation. All of those are connected, right? Where we go through that practice and we can actually change how we see things. It really is like building a muscle. And that's with any habit too, right? When you practice something, I call it gratitude practice, right? Doesn't mean you're getting it perfect, but when you are trying, when you're practicing, you will build that muscle. And then it's probably Wayne Dyer who said this, but it's like what, the more you're grateful for, the more you'll find to be grateful for. It's like this wonderful, like domino effect in the best way possible.
Yeah, and on the negativity bias, you may know the answer to this. I think I've heard that it takes 5 good things to negate 1 bad thing. Is that accurate?
I think it's actually 7, but to
7?
that
Okay.
point, math aside, no one said we were going to involve math today. But, when you think about that, you think about that if it's thinking about 5 times, 6 times, 7 times, even if you said it was a 2-to-1 ratio, it's like, for every one negative thing you have naturally, you need two to like equal it. Even if it were that low, that's still makes you think about it differently. Like,
Mhm.
whoa, I have some compensating to do in order to balance that. So yeah, it takes a good bit. So that's why it helps us so much to have these practices in place where we can look for the good and get even better at it.
So, I've told this story a million times on my podcast, so I apologize to my frequent listeners. But, when I had to stop working in 2017 due to debilitating spinal pain, I
Mm.
spent about 2 years in a really deep depression. I was grieving everything that I had lost and couldn't do anymore. And one of the things that got me out of that really dark place was gratitude. I had a lady at my church who gave me this little wooden heart and told me just every night, practice intentional daily gratitude. Close my eyes, 3 things I'm grateful for, whether I want to or not, just make it a habit every single night. And I did it. And what I found was it was incredibly helpful because instead of focusing all day long on all the things that I'd lost, all the things I didn't have, all the things I couldn't do, I was spending time focusing on the things that I did have and the things I could do, to the point where I was so grateful that even though it caused me excruciating pain to walk, I was grateful I had legs and I could walk. And just the number of things I found, because I mean, after, a handful of days, you start really stretching,
Mm.
but you're really stretching that muscle and really having to think more deeply about the things in life that you're grateful for. So it was incredibly helpful for me.
And that you did the practice and you kept it simple is the way to do it. When I coach gratitude, I talk about 4 stages, and I like this order because I think it's helpful to us. The first is awareness, and that is simply looking around, like the practice that you talked about. Find 3 things. Literally, I can look around right now. I can see I'm talking to you right now, and I'm so grateful for this opportunity, right? I have coffee in front of me. Coffee and ice cream are both on my gratitude list a lot. Okay. I can see a musical instrument by my side. I can see this thing called the sun actually shining outside my window, and I'm kind of excited. So it's that sort of laundry list approach that you start, but how simple is it to do that, right? To open your eyes and look around intentionally. Then
Mhm.
gratitude in action is actually starting to say things like thank you and connecting with the outside world and showing your gratitude by what you do. The third one you touched upon is what I call gratitude in adversity. And that is even when it is really dark in your life, there is something there that is beautiful and you can find it. And when you look for it, I liken it to the embers of a fire that might be dying out. And when you stoke them, and you take care of them, right? You give oxygen to them, you breathe life back into them, the fire starts to burn again. And that's an incredible thing when you think that you can be hurting so much, but at the same time, you can be grateful. And it is going to be that practice that will carry you through. And yeah, your story says that. The last part of the equation of the stages that I talk about is the approach. And that's sometimes, unfortunately, what people focus on first is, oh, do I need a planner? Do I need a journal? How do I
Mhm.
do this? And it's like, you do it the easiest way you can, even if it's to sit and think about it, because that's not what's important. The practice of it, the acknowledgement, being intentional and being present and in the moment, that's what's important. Eventually, you can figure out the right way that you enjoy doing it, and that will be your approach.
That's a really good point because I'm one of those people who wants to focus on the approach first. Like,
Mhm.
if I'm starting a new, I don't know, book study or something, okay, do I get a new journal for this? Do I use my old journal for this? Well, what if I put it in my regular journal or do I put it in the, and I get so overwhelmed that I end up doing nothing.
Right. It's a very natural tendency for us, especially because there are so many options out there. There's so much wisdom and, well, I should say, advice. A lot of the times it doesn't always translate to wisdom, but there are so many people out there saying, do this, do that. This worked for me. And it's not always the easiest thing, especially when you're tired and you want solutions or you want to try something, to stop and say, well, what's right for me? What can I do? But that's the way I approach productivity, because when you do find that way that feels like, oh, I can do that, not, oh, wait, do I have to do this? And now
Mhm.
I'm getting myself confused and it feels like a lot. But instead you find the, oh, all I have to do is wake up in the morning. I'll give you my example. I'm calling it gratis snooze. I feel like I should trademark it, but uh, that's how I started. My original productivity practice was get up in the morning before I touched my phone, before my feet touched the floor. It kind of like a snooze. I didn't go back to sleep, but I was just lying there and I would think of three things that I was grateful for. And that's still like a natural practice for me now. And sometimes
Mhm.
it'll be when I'm going to bed. Sometimes it will be when I'm waking up. Sometimes it'll be a random time in the middle of the day. Because of that practice, it still sort of sticks with me, even though I do change up my practice, which is another good tip. Change it up as you go. If you find something you like to do, my family has tried whiteboards, chalkboards, so that we all have a gratitude practice together. You can write it on slips of paper. You can add it to your vision board. I mean, there's so many fun ways, but sometimes the easiest thing is when we have a conversation like this, you take a
Mhm.
moment and share your gratitude with someone else, and then that compounds it. And how easy was that?
Yeah, one of the ways I do mine, because I still practice it at least once a day, and I do mine in the shower. Because, like, what else am I doing in there, right?
I love it.
So I pray and I do my gratitude while I'm just taking a shower, and
See, that's brilliant task tethering right there. And but what
yeah.
I mean by task tethering is that you can be multitasking is debunked, right? Where you have
Mhm.
to use your brain for multiple things. But when you have the habit like showering, where you know what you're doing, right? You've got the steps, you don't have to think about it. That's when the shower thoughts happen. Oh my God, I'm like inventing everything and changing the world when I'm driving in the car alone or
Yeah,
like in the shower. But what a great use of that time.
for sure. So, what are some of the ways that we're already practicing gratitude?
Oh my goodness. So acknowledging the little things. And, like I mentioned coffee, although that's not always
Mhm.
little to me, but, those little things in life, oh my goodness, little moments of the day, what I call savoring, right?
Mhm.
Noticing the sky outside or picking up on someone who smiles at you and or a kindness, just that kind of appreciation. You're probably already doing this.
Mhm.
So you are practicing gratitude. So what's really neat is that you can reverse engineer much of what you do and say, oh, that's a gratitude practice. And then that makes you notice it more, which makes you even more intentional about it and maybe even pick it up a little bit and say, oh, I'm going to try to do that more. Or, just acknowledging it. And then that creates a bigger benefit, but you're already doing that. Celebrating milestones is another example. Moments in life, oh my goodness, having gotten through something, sometimes the thing that we celebrate is, woo, I got through this day, right?
Mhm.
Sometimes we celebrate a success. If you've been to a birthday party, you practiced gratitude, right? You're celebrating another year of someone's life. You're celebrating a moment. So, yeah, every step that you take, every success that you have, those are moments of gratitude. Saying thank you, good manners really is
Mm.
gratitude. And you can start to think about opportunities where maybe you don't normally say it, or you say it and then you say it differently. And to me, that's like gratitude in action, right? Or you normally say it out loud, but you send a note or something. There's so many different ways, but you're probably already doing that. Think about that as part of your gratitude practice. And then the fourth way, and I did share these in one of my podcast episodes, so I do talk more about it, but is really just making the most of your life. No matter what hand you've been dealt, no matter what's going on, when you take a chance, take an opportunity, live life to the fullest, um, you're showing gratitude for the opportunity. When you learn something new, you're showing gratitude for your ability to learn. When you exercise, you're showing gratitude for your body's ability to move. Yeah, all of these opportunities that you take really are a form of gratitude.
I think that's great to be able to see that this is already stuff that most of us do
Mm,
just in everyday life. So
yeah,
I think that's fantastic that it makes it a lot easier to kind of add on to our intentionality,
yeah.
knowing that we've already been doing it.
Yeah, it's not something else you have to add to your to-do list. And I
Mhm.
wouldn't want you to think of gratitude that way anyhow. It's not a task to check off. It's something to invite in that can be so easy, and you get to pick how to do it. But the benefits are like astronomical.
Absolutely. So your second healing habit is simplifying. Talk to us about what that means and why that's important.
So I come from a background of being a professional organizer and dealing with clutter. So I cannot talk about simplifying without talking about decluttering, because I feel like they're all sort of wrapped up together. But the idea of simplifying is that we're reducing, we're making things far less complicated than we tend to, for reasons I can get into. And when we simplify, it requires less effort. It gives us a very clear starting point with what we need to do, and a lot of times it's more effective. I mean, we think about like explaining things to children, let's say, who are growing and learning, and the simpler we can get the concept down, right? The better it is for them to be able to learn it and to grow into it. But the same goes for us when we're learning something new. Like we just talked about gratitude, and I did my best to simplify it and to show you how easy it can be, right? That means you're far more inclined to try it. That's the benefit of simplicity. We think about things that complex is somehow more valuable. Now, maybe if you're drinking a glass of wine, you want some complexity to the flavor. I don't know, but in terms of like what we want to do in our lives, that we don't want to organize or to put energy into what we don't intend to keep. So why not keep it simple? Why not reduce the clutter? Why not have the shortest amount of steps, right? To get from point A to point B. When we do that, that means that we can pour, first of all, when we have limited energy, that means that we are then more able to do the thing. And if we do have excess energy, it means that we get to pour it into something else that is far more important.
Right, and you don't mean just simplifying, like, the items in our house and decluttering those
No,
things, right?
that's right. Yeah. So, talking about clutter in these terms, because I do believe that they're connected. Peter Walsh, he was on Clean Sweep a very long time ago and has a number of books out. And he's an Australian professional organizer who has a quote that is near and dear to my heart, that clutter isn't just the stuff on the floor, it's anything that gets in between you and the life you want to live.
Mm.
So when we think about it that way, that's a great way to assess. what I say, I call them filters when I help you, think about your values and your strengths and your personality and your goals for your life and your mission and what matters to you. You create what I call filters, like, and that means what belongs and what doesn't. It's the same idea with clutter, right? When you have those filters, you can decide what belongs and what doesn't. And the clutter itself is what doesn't belong, what's blocking you from whatever it is, the things that you need, the things that you want to achieve, the things that you love. If it's blocking you, then it's clutter. Now, conversely, you may have stuff. You could be a bibliophile like me. You could love books
Me
and,
too.
or, right? Okay. Um, if you read those and love those and honor those, if up on your wall in a bookcase, you see them and it makes you feel good, not clutter. If you
Mm.
can't get into your living room, or you're blocking a path, or you're not able to do something that you want to do, then they might be cluttered. We need to talk about what solutions there are. So that's how I'd like you to think about it. Yeah, simplifying in terms of what you're required to do, your tasks, simplifying how you think of things, the steps that it takes, simplifying the things that you have surrounding you, all of it. It's when I talk about clutter, I do talk about mental and physical, and it's really whole life. So wherever you feel like something's just gotten to be a bit too much or a bit too complicated or complex, let's think about a way that you can step back a little.
Yeah, two of the categories that we may not typically think of as clutter, but that come to mind when you're talking about things that hold you back from the life you want to live
Mhm.
are relationships
Mhm.
and like negative thoughts and limiting beliefs.
Yeah, that's emotional clutter is, I would say, is how I would describe the limiting beliefs, those, the thoughts that you have in your head, that say the stories, right? Of like what's possible or what's not, the mindset surrounding whatever it is that you're trying to achieve. The relationships, I think that's really interesting. And I think that could be considered emotional or mental too, because you start to think about things like, are you codependent? And I did an episode on this, and it was like, spoiler alert, we all are. So it's like, to what level are we? Again, that connects to the stories you're telling yourself, how you want to interact with people, what you believe in terms of your worthiness and how you allow people to treat you, right? What your boundaries are, they're all connected. And you're right, that can be clutter, because if you allow things into your life, like people in relationships where they are taking, uh, this week's episode that I did on the mental load of parents, right? And I'm sure that's a conversation that you and your community have constantly. One of the things that I researched with the mental load, of course, we're tracking all the things all the time, was this idea of not just the mental load and mental labor, but the emotional labor side of things. And that can be when you are a customer service agent and you're having to put a smile on your face while people are treating you horribly, things like that, where that's so much energy that you expend, right? Well, it's the same thing with relationships, like what you're saying. If you are in a toxic relationship, or even in a relationship where toxic might feel like too strong a word, but it's one where it's truly one-sided, where the energy is being pulled from you and you're not getting something back. Yeah, those
Mhm.
are all places to think about simplifying, decluttering, it, creating a space to breathe.
Yeah. And I love how you said, you know, about allowing people to treat us certain ways because, one of the best pieces of advice that I've ever heard is that we teach people how to treat us.
Yeah.
And if we're not setting those boundaries, then toxic, unhealthy people are going to take advantage of us and we are going to have this relational clutter.
It's so true. And I've even seen it where it's not necessarily intentional. So I'll use my
Hmm.
family as an example, where I don't
Yeah.
consider them toxic,
Mm.
but they were used to me doing certain things. They had a certain expectation of what mom does. And it's like, well,
Hmm.
listen, there's a new sheriff in town. Okay, we're doing things differently here. And yeah, teaching them that I have needs. And I love that piece of advice that you have. And one of my favorites was to not put their wants above your needs.
Mm.
I know, especially as moms, we want to do so much for them. And I love serving my family. I love caring for them. But I also have limits and I have needs and I need to start with me, right? So along those lines, yeah, that relational boundary, it's understanding what you need, it's expressing it. And you're right, we do teach them, and here's the good news, we can teach them changes as well.
Right. And I found that generally people don't like changes in the status quo. So if
No.
they're used to relying on you for their emotional needs or whatever the
Yeah,
situation is, they're going to be resistant at first. But people who love you and you're in a healthy relationship with will accept boundaries and accept changes.
that's why it's so important for you to be confident in what you're asking for, in knowing this is who you are, what you believe, what you need, and that you are worth it. And you showed up worth it. Okay. There's nothing you need to do
Mhm.
to prove that worthiness, but it's about understanding that and standing in that confidence and being like, no, this is what I need. And if you love me, and it would, I don't want to be conditional about it, but I'm just saying, you're right, when they love you, they will figure it out. And it may take a bit. You're absolutely right.
Yeah,
Been there, done that, but they get it.
right. Now you also talk about decluttering as a form of self-care.
Mm.
And I think we've kind of been touching on this in this conversation, but do you have any other points about that?
So, the list that I created to kind of help you understand how it can relate to self care is that one, it's not always easy. We sometimes mistake the idea of self care as pampering. That's one, like
Right.
I would call it sub portion of it, right? It's like, yes, you can be pampered, and that can be a form of self care, but there's also things that we need to do that are not always easy, that are work for us, setting up doctor's appointments and things like that, not fun, I should say, all the time, but they're important because there are needs, right? There is also, when you think about clutter, we talked about the definition of it, right? And it blocking the life that you want to live. Okay. But clutter itself, and especially physical, but just across the board, the studies are showing the link between stress and clutter. And now some stress in our lives is good, but continued chronic stress response is linked to continued chronic physical symptoms. You know what I mean? So it's like the more that we can reduce the clutter, the more that we attend to the clutter, the more we're actually attending to our well being. And in its own category, but along these lines, it actually helps us sleep better as well. And then again, connected to that, another way is that the more that you declutter, right? So you're simplifying, you're reducing, you're creating space. It helps us create habits. I pause there because sometimes we want to say good habits, bad habits. I'm not a fan of those words. I say habits that serve us and habits that don't. Now, all habits have a way of, finding their way in because there was some kind of reward. Even when we're procrastinating, the reward was our brain goes, oh, thank goodness we didn't have to do that thing. Right? That's the
Mhm.
reward. So we have a little, reconditioning that we have to do to get ourselves back on track for where we want to go. But the more space that you have, the less clutter, the less in your mind, not having so much that you're trying to think about, having space on the floor. Case in point, I gave my bedroom a good decluttering, and now I have space to do stretches at night, which is something
Mm.
that I've really needed to do for rehabilitation on my neck and my lower back. Such a simple thing, right? But now it makes that habit so much easier. I don't have to go searching for a spot. I have it because I reworked the space. And then the other element of it that might surprise you maybe is that when we declutter, when we deal with, let's say, sentimental physical clutter, and we process through things from when our kids were small, or something from a relative that we knew, or when we're decluttering like with relationships and other complicated things like that, it's encouraging us to process complex emotions, to feel the feels, right? To move through, as opposed to trying to block and then go off and find a coping mechanism that's none too healthy. So those are all ways that when we focus on removing clutter from our lives, we're really caring for ourselves.
So what about reverse decluttering? I saw you have a podcast episode on that. What is that and why does it work?
So when we're talking about decluttering, we're talking about filters and things like that. We're saying, okay, what belongs and what doesn't. I have a framework that I created called the simple system, right? It's SIMPLE. And that works, point for point, to go through and to declutter spaces in your life. But sometimes you can feel so overwhelmed that you need a fresh start in a way. So, reverse decluttering is an alternative technique. It's not one that I created. It's been used by professional organizers, but I haven't heard them talk about it quite the same way that I do, because it can be used for all the different types of clutter we talked about. And it's the idea of, but imagine this, if you will. This could be for your task list, your calendar, for a space, a room, wherever it is, but envision a room where you remove everything and you only put back what you believe belongs.
Mm.
That's the reverse decluttering. So with decluttering in a standard sense, you're like, okay, I have a whole bunch of this stuff, and now I have like these guidelines, these filters, and let me double check, let me reconcile everything, what belongs, what doesn't, let me move this around. And that's very doable, in everyday life. That's how we traditionally work through clutter. But reverse decluttering is, we're removing it all. You do this sometimes naturally if you've moved a space, moved into a new office, moved into a new house. I did this actually twice, once while moving my mom in before I was a caregiver for her in our home, and then once moving my entire family into our new home that we're in. And I used, actually, because of the move that I did with my mom, I found that to be so helpful. We had, what were we going to put in the new space? And only that goes, and that's marked to move. And then everything else, it made it very easy to say, okay, now we can have other family members and friends take what they want, and we can sell the rest and auction the rest and donate the rest. And we just, it made the decisions easier. And the reason why it can be so helpful is, one, it's a simpler concept in a way. Even though it's big, it's simple. Okay. And it flips the script so that you're focusing on the positive and the potential of what belongs, as opposed to trying to remove the stuff that doesn't belong. So that can sometimes be helpful for your brain to reverse it and think about it that way.
That makes perfect sense. And we're actually about to move. So we're in the process of, getting rid of stuff.
Mhm.
However, once we get moved, I imagine that I'm going to do exactly that. I'm
Yeah.
only going to be putting back in these rooms things that really matter.
Exactly. And you can start to think about it that way right now. And to your point, though, and again, being realistic, sometimes we'll think, oh, I want to keep, all of these things. And then when you get to the new space, you do have a second level of decluttering and an opportunity to say, but really, does it fit? So there's a lot of things to consider when you're decluttering and organizing, because the space that you have, and again, if you think about it, this applies to how much space do you have in a room, how much space do you have on a digital device, how much space do you have in your head, you know what I mean, or on your
Hmm.
calendar for that matter. It all applies, but it's definitely an opportunity to say, I'm starting fresh. What truly belongs.
Hmm. I like that. So, where can we get more information about you and about what you do?
Well, you're listening to an amazing podcast right now. So if you want to pop over to my podcast, Positively Living, you can hear more about each of these topics. There's lots of episodes on self care and gratitude and decluttering and simplifying and all the things that we talked about and more. You can always go to my website, just as the main hub, positivelyproductive.com. And if you like to play on Instagram and have a little laugh with me, I do ridiculous reels to make you
Mhm.
laugh and to make my point over on Instagram. And that's positively_Lisa.
Awesome. So, thank you so much for coming on. This has been just so interesting and hopefully helpful for everybody.
I hope so too. Thank you, Lauren. It's really been my
Mhm.
pleasure.
Make sure to subscribe to this podcast so you don't miss any health, parenting, and life advice. For my freebie, 30 ways to relieve pain without taking a pill, go to ithurtstomom.com/tips. If you have comments, suggestions, or want to be on this podcast, email me at ithurtstomom@gmail.com. I wish you all a blessed and pain-free day. Bye.